I was late on rent, my old pickup quit on a rainy Tuesday, and my landlord's nephew stood in my driveway. He offered to fix the truck for cheap, but something in his eyes was broken too. If I let him in, would I risk my heart or finally find home? I told myself I only needed wheels to keep my job, but he needed a reason to keep believing in people. What we traded changed us, deeper than oil. Together, if this touched you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments about love, choices, and healing today. It happened on the kind of Ohio afternoon that presses down like a hand. Gray and steady, with rain tapping a soft drum beat on mailboxes and porch rails. My rental duplex sat on a side street south of Clintonville, not far from the railway spur. I was a tenant. And on that Tuesday, all I could hear in my head was the landlord's voicemail about rent due. The old pickup. A '97 Ford with faded red paint and a bed liner that had seen better summers had grumbled to a stop near the curb. I'd turned the key and gotten nothing but a tired cough. The wipers were tired, too, dragging across the glass with a patient complaint. Somewhere a train horn moaned, and it felt like the neighborhood was sighing with me. I needed that truck to get to my shift at the hardware store and to pick up extra deliveries on weekends. Without it, I was stuck and short. Rent doesn't wait for engine trouble or bad weather. I sat with my palms on the steering wheel, counting breaths, telling myself I'd figure it out like I always did. I popped the hood, as if I had any idea what I was looking for beyond loose hoses and obvious leaks. Steam didn't pour out and nothing looked charred, which felt like a small victory. The rain found the back of my collar when I stepped out, and I shivered, pressing the hood rod into its notch. In the rusted reflection on the fender, I caught a blurry shape coming down the sidewalk. A man in a navy jacket with reflective strips, a cap pulled low, and a tool bag slung over his shoulder. He moved with purpose but not haste, that quiet way some folks have when they spend time thinking more than talking. "You must be Henry," he said. His voice had a warm, gravelly tone, like a local morning radio host who cares how your day is going. "I'm Caleb. My aunt's your landlord, Mrs. Alvarez." I'd met her twice, the second time to talk about the possibility of painting the porch railing in exchange for a rent break. She was practical and kind. I'd never heard her mention a nephew, but I believed him right away. He had her same steady eyes. "I'm the tenant," I said, as if a man with his head in an old truck in the rain needed clarification. "Nice to meet you." "Same," he said, tipping his cap slightly. "Aunt Teresa mentioned you were having car trouble." "She had me in the neighborhood anyway. Mind if I take a look?" "It's a strange thing, Trust." That week I had a list of reasons to be wary. Late rent, a vehicle that had decided to hold my paycheck hostage, a bank balance that made me avoid eye contact with the ATM. But Caleb stood there with rain diamonds on his eyelashes and an honest expression that made me want to let some air into the room. "Please," I said, stepping back. "If you can tell me what's wrong, I'd appreciate it." He nodded and set his tool bag down on the curb, opening it with a practiced sweep. The inside was orderly. Sockets arranged by size, a multimeter tucked in a side pocket, a rag draped over a small case of fuses. He leaned in under the hood like a man saying hello to a stubborn friend. "Turn the key," he said, his voice more gentle than the truck deserved. I slid into the driver's seat and did as told. The engine coughed, then went quiet. Caleb's head popped up. "Okay, again," he said. "Don't pump the gas." I tried again. He nodded to himself, then reached into the engine bay. I watched his hands move. Broad, capable hands, a faint scar across the knuckles like a soft ribbon of memory. He tapped a relay, adjusted a line, and then he slipped the multimeter probes with careful intention, like he didn't want to spook the truck into further mischief. "Fuel pump's not consistent," he said after a minute. "Might be the relay or the wiring's corroded. Seen this before on Fords of this era. How long's it been since she had some attention?" "Define attention," I said, and he smiled. It reached his eyes for a second before retreating, like a sunshine behind cloud cover. "We can try swapping the relay and checking the grounds," he said. "I've got spares in the van. If that's it, you'll be on the road for $20. If it's the pump and we've got to drop the tank, I'll be honest with you before we do anything." He said the words like it was muscle memory. "I'll be honest with you. It stuck. I can pay for the relay, I said, hoping my voice didn't betray how tight every decision felt. I need the truck to work. I'm short on rent, but I'm not short on wanting to do right. He met my gaze, and there it was again. That quiet something, a tiredness in his shoulders that didn't belong to the rain. He nodded, then walked back to a white van with Alvarez Property Services painted on the door. He returned with a small box and a zipper pouch. This should do for now, he said. If it is the pump, it's not going to go from nothing to perfect. But it might buy you some time. We worked together then. He coached me like a patient teacher, handing me a flashlight and showing me where to hold it so he didn't have to crane his neck into an unnatural angle. He asked me about the hardware store and listened when I said I liked how the sharp smell of lumber in the morning felt like an invitation to start fresh. You into building? He asked. Practical stuff, I said. I make a decent birdhouse. Not much of a show-off. I like fixing what's here. He smiled again, just a flicker. He clipped the new relay in place, checked connections, and asked me to try the key again. I did. The engine turned over, coughed, then caught with a whir that felt like relief wearing a work jacket. There, he said softly. Hear that? She's shy but ready. A laugh startled out of me. That's how I've been described. He leaned back, wiped his hands on the rag, and blew out a steady breath. The rain had shifted to a light sprinkle, and across the street wind pushed a neighbor's wind chimes into a gentle voice. So, he looked at his hands, then at me. 20 for the relay, and if it gives you trouble again, call the number on the van. Ask for me, not the main line. We'll figure it out. I pulled my wallet and counted my cash. It felt both intimate and brave to hand him those bills because I didn't have many left. He tucked them carefully into a small zip pocket on his tool bag. Thank you, I said. I mean it. You're welcome, he said, and some of the gentleness in his tone made me want to ask who had been unkind to it. He zipped the bag closed and stood with a small stretch. Take care of yourself, Henry. You too, I said. I wanted to offer coffee, a towel, something kind to match the help he'd given me, but I hesitated. He nodded, tapped the edge of the hood with his knuckles, and walked back toward the van. I watched him go, a question heavy in my mouth. Then I turned the key again and listened to the engine settle into a working rhythm. I sat for a while, letting the heater fog the windshield and then clear it. The street came back into focus, and I caught sight of the reflective glint of his van's taillights turning the corner. That night, I put a pot of chili on the stove and ate it in the glow of the small lamp by the couch. A game played low on the radio, and the sound of commentators arguing softly about a missed call felt like company. I spread my rent envelope on the coffee table and counted again. Short, still short. I made a list on the back of an old grocery receipt. Offer to paint the porch. Ask Mrs. Alvarez about paying in 2 installments this month. Take on more deliveries if the truck held. I wrote, call Caleb if truck acts up, and put a star by it. I didn't know him. Not really, but something in the way he said I'll be honest made me want to believe him. The next morning, my phone buzzed around 9. A text from an unfamiliar number. Hey, it's Caleb. Just checking the truck made it through the night. I smiled, surprised by the care. I typed back, yes, thank you. You saved me. I owe you coffee if you're ever nearby. He responded with a coffee cup emoji made of punctuation, 2 dashes, and a vertical line that made me grin. Might take you up on that, he wrote. Aunt Teresa likes a charity she volunteers for on Wednesdays, so I swing by your street sometimes after dropping supplies. What charity? I typed. Meals on Wheels, he wrote. She's on one of the routes. I worry about older folks who aren't seen often enough. I glanced at the calendar on the wall and thought about the way the world had been since the pandemic. How we'd all had to learn the difference between being alone and being isolated. Me too, I wrote. If you ever need an extra hand on a Saturday, let me know. I've got 2 good ones and a beat-up truck, he sent back. Noted. Then, have a good day, Henry. You too. Caleb. I stared at his name on the screen for a moment and then tucked the phone into my pocket. At work, I kept hearing that gravel-warm voice in my head saying, hear that? She's shy but ready. And I couldn't help but think about my heart. Thursday, the engine died again on my way back from the warehouse. It didn't cough. It simply went quiet, and I rolled to a stop under an oak tree shedding wet leaves along High Street. The rain had returned, and the chill in the air made each exhale a little cloud. I texted Caleb, fingers stiff with cold, trucks shy again. Corner of High and Blake, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, he replied. Sit tight. I'm close. I wrapped my jacket tighter and watched people hurry by under umbrellas like moving toadstools. A bus hissed to a stop, and a woman in a yellow raincoat helped an older man with a walker step down slowly. I was thinking about how many small acts hold a day together when Caleb tapped the passenger window. Mind if I get in? He asked, peering through the glass. Please, I said, reaching over to pop the lock. He climbed in, shaking water from his hat. His jacket sprinkled with rain like confetti, reluctant to leave. You okay? He asked, searching my face with real attention. I will be, I said. It's been a week. He nodded as if he understood more than I said, then got back to the business at hand. Let's see if we can coax her again. He guided me through a few tests, then shook his head with a soft cluck. It's the pump or a bad ground. I can do the pump for you, but it's a bigger job. Labor is what it is, but I can think with you on the number. Or, if you want to try something temporary, we can clean up the ground points now and see what tomorrow brings. I looked at the time, then at him. I can't afford a major fix until next Friday, I said quietly. I don't want you working for free either. What if we make it fair, he said. I've got a few small tasks to knock out for Aunt Teresa this weekend. A couple of paint touch-ups, some broken tiles. You mentioned painting. You help me and I'll help you. We both keep costs down. I'll clear it with her. The suggestion took a moment to sink in. It wasn't charity and it wasn't a handout. It was neighbors making a good deal. It warmed something that had been cold too long. That's kind, I said. Thank you. It's practical, he said gently. Honest, too. He smiled that flicker again and then nodded toward the key. Try her once more. The engine started, stubborn as a mule but alive. He told me to drive straight home and park by the curb so he could reach the truck later. He tapped the dash lightly with his knuckles like it was an old dog. I'll swing by your place after I finish at the other building, he said. And don't worry about rent while I'm there. I won't talk money with you in your driveway unless you want to. Deal, I said, meaning more than one thing. At home, the rain eased. I pulled the plastic bin of paintbrushes from the hall closet and set them near the door, then made a pot of coffee. I wiped the counter twice because I needed to do something with my hands. When his van pulled up, I met him on the porch with 2 mugs. You didn't have to, he said, accepting one. This smells great. I'm learning to get the brew right, I said. After 46 years, you'd think I'd have it down. He grinned, really grinned this time, and took a sip. You're good at this, he said. Honestly, we worked on the porch railing together first. I held the paint tray and moved down the planks while he sanded the rough spots gently. The boards took the fresh color like they'd been waiting. The air smelled like rain and latex paint, and cars whisked by, their tires hushing like whispers on wet pavement. He told me he grew up in Dayton, but after high school he spent time in Kentucky, then back to Ohio to help Aunt Teresa with the family properties. I like fixing things, he said, but I left a lot behind. Some days I'm not sure if I'm moving towards something or just away. I rolled a clean stripe and waited. He didn't say more, and I didn't push. People deserve to unfold at their own pace. Instead, I told him my story. How I moved to the duplex after the divorce. How I thought the quiet would hurt more than it did, and then sometimes it did. Your ex, he said carefully. Good person? Good in many ways, I said. We were different people and we didn't know how to talk about it. I was slower to admit who I was to myself, much less to anyone else. And by the time I did, our path had shifted. He nodded. I'm gay, he said, not loudly, not with armor, just like he was telling me his favorite radio station. Sometimes in my family it was easier to fix their houses than to fix the conversation. I made sure he saw my eyes and the smile in them. Thank you for telling me. Me too. He held my gaze and his shoulders loosened a fraction. For a beat, our 2 lives, which had been running alongside each other like the grooves of a record, met and made a chord. He lifted his mug and took a sip, then set it on the porch rail with a small clink. I had a guy, he said finally. We were together almost 3 years. We made plans. bought a set of dishes together. Then life happened, and he left without a lot of words. It knocked something out of me I haven't figured out how to set back. I reached for the paintbrush to keep my hands steady. That hurts, I said. I'm sorry, thanks, he said. I don't say it for a parade. I just want to be honest. After we finished a coat on the railings, we moved to the chipping paint around the window frame. When we ran out of tasks for the day, he checked my truck again, cleaned the ground points, and tightened 2 connections with confident twists of his wrist. She should start easier tomorrow, he said. We'll keep an eye on it. As he packed his tools, a passing car sent up a wave from a puddle and splashed his jeans. He laughed softly and looked down at the water creeping up the denim. It's always the little side hits, he said. I went inside and returned with a towel. Here, I said. I'm not going to let you go home wet after saving my day twice. Appreciated, he said. He took the towel and pressed it into the fabric, thoughtful and careful. Then, surprising both of us, he let out a breath and said, Do you ever feel like you've got a toolbox full of wrenches, but the one you need for your own life is missing? His eyes shifted like he'd said too much. I held the moment gently, all the time, I said. Sometimes I find out the wrench I needed was a conversation. He nodded and looked at me with a mix of hope and caution. Maybe coffee again Saturday? Not as payment, just because I like standing in the rain with you and not all company is work. Yes, I said quickly, then slowed. Yes, Saturday's good. Saturday morning, the sky opened to the kind of blue that felt like an apology for the week. I arranged 2 mugs and a slice of banana bread I'd picked up at the farmer's market, and I tried not to straighten the same stack of mail 3 times. When Caleb knocked, I said, Come in, before the second tap. He stepped inside and removed his hat, hair damp around the edges, eyes bright. He looked around the small living room, a couch with a faded quilt, a bookshelf with a ceramic duck I'd found at a yard sale, a framed postcard of a lighthouse, and smiled. Nice place, he said. Feels like someone cares about it. I try, I said. I am a tenant, but it's home. He nodded like he understood the difference. We carried coffee to the couch and sat at a polite distance. The banana bread was more cinnamon than banana, and he said he liked it that way. We talked about things that fill the air with more ease than silence. The morning's baseball schedule, the new grocery store that used to be a bowling alley, a neighbor's cat that had adopted the whole block. When the conversation found a natural pause, he looked at his hands. I've been thinking, he said, about that dish set. I gave mine away after the breakup. It felt like keeping it was hanging on to a conversation that had ended. Practical and symbolic, I said. What did your aunt say? She said she had plates, he said, and smiled. She always does. We stepped out onto the porch and watched a cardinal hop around the maple tree, brilliant red against the green. He told me about his job. He did more than maintenance. He helped coordinate repairs in other units, checked on older tenants who didn't always open the door the first time, drove Aunt Teresa to the Meals on Wheels route once a week when she needed a break. I like the folks on the route, he said. They have stories. One guy used to be a big band trumpeter. He told me the best warm-up is 6 slow breaths and a scale that starts wherever your voice feels grateful. Do you play? I asked. Used to, he said. My dad taught me a few chords on the guitar when I was a kid. I still know 2 or 3. It's enough for an honest song. We settled into a routine. He'd check in on the truck and we'd check in on each other. Some evenings he'd knock and we'd stand in the backyard by the picnic table that had come with the duplex, listening to crickets and passing a jar of spare screws back and forth as if it were a glass of lemonade. The truck behaved mostly like a stubborn child who enjoys testing boundaries. One Sunday, it wasn't the truck that stalled. It was me. I was leaving a double shift when my manager pulled me aside and said he had to cut hours next month. The store was trying to meet overhead, and the back-to-school rush had come and gone. I nodded and said I understood, then walked to the parking lot and sat in the cab with my hands on the wheel and my chest tight. I drove home the slow way, counting lights to keep from counting dollars. When I turned onto my street, I saw Caleb's van parked in front of Mrs. Alvarez's house. I turned into my driveway and sat in the truck until my breathing stopped sounding like an old kettle. Then I climbed out and almost bumped into him. Hey, he said softly. You okay? I nodded because I didn't know how to shake my head without making everything spill. He looked at me for 2 long beats, then tilted his head toward my front door. "Let's sit," he said. In the living room, I told him what had happened. He listened without trying to fix it, which told me more about his heart than his tools ever could. When I stopped talking, he asked one simple question. "What do you need right now?" "Someone to say it's going to be okay," I said, and we both smiled at the honesty. "It's going to be okay," he said. Then, after a beat, "Not because the world owes us, but because you're not alone in it." He reached for my hand and paused a breath away. "Is it okay if I—" "Yes," I said, and he took my hand carefully. Warm, steady, nothing rushed. The first contact was like the first good chord after a long tune-up. "I don't have a magic answer," he said, "but I can bring you applications. My friend knows a delivery company looking for drivers. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. And if the truck acts up, we'll deal with it." "You keep saying we," I said, surprised by how much one small word could hold. "I mean it," he replied. We met the next afternoon at the coffee table with papers spread like a map. He explained insurance terms and the route hours. He didn't press me. He checked that I understood. He asked if I wanted to sleep on it and circle back, and he meant it. Consent is not just for romance, it's for choices and changes, too. I applied and got the job. The first week, Caleb left me a small sticky note in the glove compartment with a drawing of a smiley face wearing a hard hat. Under it, he'd written, "You've got this. Text if you need a cheer." On a Friday run, the truck sputtered, then settled. At home, I told him it felt like a low whistle through a missing tooth. He laughed and said my metaphors were getting better. Then he slid under the truck on a creeper and showed me the fuel line clamp that had loosened from time and rain. "I can fix this now," he said. "It won't fight me." He tightened it with a small clicking sound. When he emerged, there was grease on his cheek. I handed him a rag, and he caught me watching him, the curve of a smile in the corner of my mouth. He wiped his face and tilted his head. "What?" he asked, gentle and curious. "Nothing," I said. "Just thinking how the first time we met, you looked like a man walking through rain with a storm inside. And now you look like somebody who found the porch light." He looked down, and when he looked up again, there was something in his eyes bright as the cardinal. "You make that feeling real," he said. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect it either. I'd gone from living with closed curtains to opening the blinds on purpose. Now I found myself noticing the way morning light made a small honey pool on the kitchen floor. I ate breakfast at the table instead of standing at the counter. I bought a plant and put it on the windowsill like a promise. We didn't rush. We made room for caution because it made room for care. When he reached for my shoulder one night as we laughed about a video of a dog trying to sing to a harmonica, he paused just long enough for me to nod. When he leaned in on the porch and kissed me, soft, tentative, like he was asking a question with his mouth, I answered with a yes he could feel. It wasn't a movie scene, with swelling music and fireworks. It was better. It was two people who had been lonely in the same city at different kitchens, standing on a porch that still smelled faintly like paint and rain, deciding to be not lonely together. The next week held more small, real moments. We went to the thrift store to look for a jacket for me and came home with a cast-iron skillet he said would last longer than either of us. We cooked dinner. He chopped onions, eyes watering, and insisted it was the onions. I stirred the skillet and pretended not to notice the way he stayed close without crowding. One afternoon, Mrs. Alvarez knocked. She stood on my porch with her hands folded, a smile and a question in the tilt of her head. "Henry," she said, "is everything okay with your place? Caleb tells me you and he have been bartering a bit. I like it when folks help each other." "It's been good," I said. "And I wanted to ask you something. Not about the pipes or the paint." She waited, patient as a well-built chair. "I think I like your nephew," I said. "And I think he likes me. I wanted to make sure it wouldn't put you in a spot as my landlord." Her smile widened a notch, and it had kindness in it like a soft light. "Henry," she said, "I care about the roof and the rent, but I care more about how people treat each other under that roof. If you two treat each other with respect, I'm happy. Caleb deserves joy. You do too. Just keep the lines clear. No special treatment. No secrets that turn into mess later." "Understood," I said, relieved to the point of feeling a little lightheaded. We aim for honest. Good, she said. And for the record, I already liked you before this. You return my calls and keep the place neat. That counts. After she left, I texted Caleb. Your aunt gave us her blessing as long as we're honest. He replied with a smiling face made out of parentheses and a colon. I love that woman, he wrote, and I love that you asked. The days lengthened toward summer. The truck ran smooth enough, and my delivery routes took me through parts of the city I'd only ever driven past on my way somewhere else. I learned to time the stoplights on 3rd Street, and I learned which customers appreciated a wave and which preferred a nod. I kept a cooler with bottles of water and handed them to folks waiting for buses when the heat pressed down. Caleb and I started a small tradition. After my Friday shift, we walked to the ice cream shop on the corner and split a double scoop of black cherry in a waffle cone. We took turns holding the napkin around the base to keep it from dribbling onto wrists, and we'd pause between bites to point out an interesting cloud or a neighbor's new mailbox. One Friday, we found ourselves sitting on the curb outside the shop, licking our spoons and letting the evening settle. He rolled his shoulders and let out a small sigh that sounded more like release than frustration. How are you? I asked. He stared ahead for a moment, watching an older couple walk past, hands clasped, matching steps as if practiced. My ex texted, he said. He's engaged. I waited for the ache to hit, and I saw it. It was tender, not sharp. It had a shape I recognized. He pressed his lips together, then looked at me. I thought I'd be angry, he said. I thought I'd feel nothing. Instead, I feel like I want him to be happy, and like I might be okay too. Both can be true, I said. You can wish him well and wish yourself well. He turned one palm up on his knee, as if weighing the sentence. I think I needed this place, he said. This street. Aunt Teresa. A porch that smells like paint. A man who makes coffee and asks me if I'm comfortable. I needed a life that didn't ask me to prove I deserve it. I set my hand on the curb near his and inched it closer. You don't have to prove anything to me. He looked down at our hands, then slipped his fingers into mine. There was a quiet joy in that simple fit, a click softer than a fuel line clamp, but as sure. We took small trips, a salvage yard an hour out of town, where sunlight made the chrome bits wink, and we walked row after row like tourists in a museum of stories. Caleb talked about the beauty in a function, how a piece made well wears into its purpose like a song played enough times to find the right tempo. He picked up a side mirror and turned it in his hands. The glass reflected us in a strange funhouse angle, two men with hats and smiles standing close. He put it back gently and reached for me with his other hand, not letting the moment slip past. On a Sunday in July, we drove to the river and sat on a bench near a slow bend. People walked dogs and pushed strollers, and a breeze lifted the heat for a few thoughtful minutes. He told me about his dad, how the man had known how to fix anything with an engine but not always what to do with a soft-hearted son. He tried in his way, Caleb said. He told me love was a promise you make when you're awake enough to keep it. He didn't always manage it himself, but he wanted that for me. I thought about the promises we make in small ways. Putting the kettle on when we know someone's on their way over. Taping a sticky note in a glove box. Checking the brake lights for a friend. We're awake, I said. At least for now. He laughed. At least for now. We didn't live on a cloud. There were hard days. A tenant in another building got sick, and Caleb spent hours there, helping coordinate a safe cleanup and care. He came home ragged, smelling like bleach and fatigue, and he fell asleep on my couch mid-sentence. I covered him with the quilt and sat by the lamp, listening to the gentle in-out of his breath, feeling a tenderness I hadn't expected could be so calm. Another time, a storm knocked out power on our block, and the neighborhood became a gathering of porch silhouettes and shared flashlights. People came out with coolers to save the meat before it thawed. Someone brought a battery-powered radio, and we listened to the announcer make jokes about calling a game with no lights. Caleb passed out batteries to a family with kids and checked on Mr. Leahy, the retired teacher who lived 2 doors down. In the dark, he found my hand and squeezed it. This is what I want, he whispered. Not the storm. The together. When the power came back, We cheered like we'd scored the winning run. In the kitchen, we made sandwiches by the light of a room that hummed again. And I thought, we're learning to be the sort of people who know where the candles are and who to share them with. One evening in late August, I found Caleb in my driveway with something wrapped in newspaper. He looked as nervous as a person can look when they're holding cutlery. "I saw this at a yard sale," he said, "and I thought of you." He unwrapped a set of mismatched plates. Good weight, small chips that told you they'd seen years of service. One had a blue border with tiny flowers. Another had a thin golden rim and a faint crack like a river on a map. "A replacement for the dishes you gave away?" I asked, teasing gently. He shook his head. "A beginning for evenings that feel like home." We washed them in warm water with a drop of dish soap and set them on the rack to dry. Later, we ate spaghetti with too much garlic on the blue one and the gold rim, and afterwards we stood at the sink, hips a breadth apart, and cleaned up. "It's strange," he said, handing me a drying towel. I kept thinking my heart was a broken part I needed to replace. "But you didn't hand me a new one. You just held the old one like it wasn't a flaw. I think it's the only kind that knows how to love well," I said. "The one that's been used." We kept asking each other for consent as if it were air. "Can I hold your hand? Can I kiss you? Can I tell you something hard? Can I ask you to meet me at the farmer's market at 9? The answer wasn't always yes, but it was always heard. I met Aunt Teresa for lunch one day. She had a way of making chicken salad feel like a conversation with a good friend. "He's different," she said, stirring her iced tea and giving me a look with 100 questions and warm answers behind it. "Softer lately." "You have that effect." "I hope I have a good effect," I said. "You do," she said. "But remember, your own rent, your own work, your own routines. Love doesn't mean losing yourself. It means sharing a table and passing the salt back." In September, the truck finally gave its last stubborn sigh on a highway ramp. I coasted onto the shoulder, turned on the hazard lights, and there, under that wide Ohio sky, I felt something like peace. I called Caleb, then a tow truck. When he arrived, he leaned his head into the open window. "She's done, isn't she?" he asked. "I think so," I said. "I think she's telling me it's time." He rested a hand on the window frame. "I'm sorry," he said. "She carried you a long way." "She did," I said. "I meant more than the truck." We stood in the gravel and watched the tow truck driver hook her up. The man was kind, used my name, and took care not to scrape the bumper. Caleb put his arm around my shoulders, slowly, like he was checking with me and himself at the same time. I leaned into him. "I'll be okay," I said. "We'll be okay. We will," he said. Then, playful, "And I know a guy who can car shop like a bargain hunter." We found a used pickup that wasn't fancy but felt trustworthy, the way some people do when they shake your hand and hold your gaze without trying to sell you anything you don't need. The newer truck had a working radio that didn't hum on AM, and I set it to a station that played oldies on the way home. He tapped the steering wheel in rhythm, and the world felt like it had rounded a corner. Fall came with a crispness that made morning coffee taste like something more than a routine. We carved pumpkins on the porch for the neighborhood kids, and he put a goofy grin on his and I carved a simple round one on mine. On Halloween, we handed out candy and admired costumes with the respect owed to someone brave enough to knock on a stranger's door. "I like who I am here," he said that night, after we closed the door on the last dinosaur and princess. "I like who you are everywhere," I said. He looked at me the way you look at a place you'd like to stay. "The honest thing," he said, "is that I think I love you." My heart didn't race. It didn't need to. It expanded like a lung taking its first deep, unhurried breath after a long climb. "I love you too," I said. We stood in the living room with our carved pumpkins on the table and the night pressing against the windows, and we said it again. Not louder, truer. Later we made tea. We talked about what love meant to each of us in the practical sense. Calendars and money and space to be quiet sometimes. He told me he'd like to spend the night. He made sure I knew I could say no or yes with boundaries. We decided how we wanted to share that intimacy, careful and loving, in ways that felt safe and good for both of us. In the morning, we made pancakes. The first one came out oddly shaped, like Ohio, which made us both laugh. He flipped the next one with a flick of his wrist and a little show-off flair that told me he'd practiced. We ate them on the mismatched plates, drizzled with syrup, and we looked at each other with a calm that felt like a new kind of sunrise. We faced the day together, and the next, and the next. We said no when we needed to. We said yes when it mattered. We made mistakes and apologized. We bought a calendar and wrote in dinners and days to check the air filters. We adopted a dog from the shelter, a cautious brown mutt with a white chest we named Domino because he liked to sit in series of small collapses at our feet. Domino loved us like we were the softest pillows and the firmest promises. On Thanksgiving, we set the table with the mismatched plates and invited 2 neighbors who didn't have places to go. Mrs. Alvarez brought rolls that made the house smell like memory. Caleb carved the turkey with the concentration of a surgeon. He looked up once and caught my gaze, and we both smiled the smile of people who know what they have is good because it is chosen again and again. Winter leaned in with quiet snowfall and ice that insisted we walk carefully. The truck started each morning with a dependable rumble. Caleb switched to a thicker oil and showed me how to listen for the small sounds that say, "Respect me, and I'll carry you." We took Domino to the park and watched his breath puff like little clouds as he jumped into a pile of leaves with the joy of someone who has just discovered pockets of wonderful. On a cold Sunday, we drove downtown and listened to a jazz trio at a small cafe. The trumpet player was older now, maybe even the very man Caleb had mentioned from the route, and the way he lifted his horn to his lips with reverence made my chest flutter. Caleb squeezed my knee under the table, and I rested my hand there, easy. Walking back to the truck, he said, "I never told you the whole thing about my ex. I thought loving him meant I had to break parts of myself to fit his life. I don't want that anymore. Not with you. I want a life that has room." "We're making it," I said. "Right now." He stopped under a streetlight, snow spiraling down through the glow, and looked at me like the answer to a question he'd asked himself for years. "We are," he said. We kissed, slow, breath visible in the cold. It wasn't about spectacle. It was about staying present through the length of a song you don't want to end, but which gets better when you don't rush to the last note. The world wasn't perfect. Rent prices crept up, and we had to get creative. I picked up a morning shift at a bakery on weekends because I like the way dough feels like possibility under your hands. Caleb negotiated a better rate for the property services with a vendor by being honest and fair. We cut back in small ways that didn't feel like punishments, but like choices we were proud of. Sometimes I'd wake in the night and listen to the furnace, that steady companion, and hear him breathe next to me. I'd think about that first rainy Tuesday when my truck gave up, and a man with a tool bag walked down the sidewalk with a quiet storm inside. If I could reach back through time, I'd tell myself to open the hood, yes, but also to open the door. Spring returned, green and insistently hopeful. The maple leafed out, the birds tuned their notes, and the neighborhood came back onto porches like perennials. Caleb built a small raised bed in the backyard, and we planted tomatoes that tasted like July when the fruit finally came in. We learned that Domino loved to sleep in the sun and pretend he didn't hear us calling until he decided he was ready to come in with grand dignity. On a warm evening, we sat by the grill and watched smoke curl like a ribbon. He set down his tongs and looked at me with a smile that would have made anyone feel seen. "You mended my heart," he said quietly. "Not by stitching it shut. By sitting with me while it learned to beat where it could be heard. You fixed my truck," I said. "But really, you fixed so much more. You fixed rooms in me I didn't visit. You replaced the relay and my willingness to trust." We laughed at our mechanic metaphors, but it wasn't a joke. We both knew the feel of a machine that wants to run and the patience it takes to help it do what it's made to do. We'd learned we could be gentle without being fragile. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small thing. For a moment, I thought it might be a ring, and my heart jumped, then settled. It was a key. "He placed it in my palm. A spare," he said. "To my place? You don't have to use it, but I want you to have it. I want you to know you belong." I closed my fingers around it, the weight small and perfect. "I have something too," I said, and I stood and went to the drawer by the door where I keep envelopes and batteries and fragments of string that seem useful. I returned with a small envelope and handed it to him. He opened it and slid out a Polaroid I'd taken on my old camera. It was him on the porch, in late afternoon light, wiping his hands with a rag, smiling with his head tilted like he'd just heard the good part of a story. On the back, I'd written, "The day you fixed more than the relay." He looked at it longer than a person looks at a picture if they just want to say thanks and put it away. He held it like the thing it was. A tiny moment caught. Proof that a life is happening even when we aren't sure what to call it yet. "I'll keep this," he said, "in my wallet, next to the picture of my aunt and me when I was 10 with a buzz cut and a coat 2 sizes too big." We ate dinner. We cleaned up. We held each other in the doorway while the evening settled, and a neighbor walked a dog that barked at everything in a way that felt like enthusiasm more than complaint. Later, we sat on the couch, the new truck keys on the hook by the door, the dog curled against us, and the house hum a steady comfort. Every so often, I think about that first day as if it's happening now. I can still feel the rain around my collar, the weight of my worries, the sound of the engine refusing. I can still see Caleb's cap tilted under gray sky, and the way he said, "I'll be honest with you," like a promise he made to himself first. I don't know which of us did more fixing. He brought tools and patience and questions that landed in the right place. I brought coffee and listening and the kind of quiet that lets a person hear their own thoughts. Together, we built something without a blueprint, and we check it like good mechanics regularly. On the anniversary of that Tuesday, we drove to the river bench again. The water was a little higher than last year. A heron lifted off and slid low across the surface, wing beats slow and sure. We sat, our shoulders touching, and let the world be. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might be if your truck hadn't stalled?" he asked. "I think about it and decide the truck knew something we didn't," I said. "Or more likely, life is stubborn and precise at the same time." He took my hand, thumb brushing the knuckle in a rhythm I recognized from a song on that jazz night. "I'm glad," he said. "Not for the breakdown, but for what we chose after." "Me too," I said. We chose each other. We sat until the shadows stretched long. He looked at me and asked, "Dessert at home?" "Yes," I said. "Anything with cherries." We walked back to the truck and the engine started with the kind of sound that makes you breathe easy. On the drive home, he told me about a tenant who'd asked for help lifting a box and how she'd offered him a jar of homemade jam in thanks. He said he didn't want payment. She insisted. We laughed, because you can't argue with a grandmother who has decided you're leaving with a jar of jam. At home, we put the jam on toast and ate it in the kitchen, standing, and it tasted like summer saved for winter. We clinked toast the way some people clink glasses. "Here's to relays," he said, "and to grounds cleaned and tightened," I said. "And to love that notices," he said, "and to love that stays," I said. Dominio wagged his tail and nosed our knees as if to agree. The house hummed. The city breathed outside. We stood together, 2 men who had learned that careful and brave can be best friends, and that a repaired thing is not a lesser thing. It's proof that someone cared enough to keep showing up. He fixed my truck. I mended his heart. Maybe we did both, and maybe it's the same work. It takes knowing where to look, where to listen, and it takes deciding that a life, like a good engine and a good love, runs best when you check in, keep it clean, and say thank you to every honest sound. And every once in a while, it takes stepping into the rain to meet a stranger with a tool bag and find you're both headed home.